This is the Art Beauty Podcast where we tell the real truth about the fake shit. I'm Amber, and today my fabulous co-host is Dr. Chloe Carmichael. She's a friend of the show. You've seen her podcast before. You've heard her podcast before. We love to have you back. And actually, Dr. Chloe, you have a brand new book out. Congratulations.
Thanks so much, Amber. Yeah, I'm really excited. And we just got an endorsement from Deepak Chopra. So that was big news.
Oh, yes. And so the book is called Nervous Energy, Harness the Power of Your Anxiety. And I love this because it's really about sort of taking our anxiety and transforming it into something positive. I think that, so many people these days are telling me that they've got bad anxiety. Do you think that's a relatively newish thing?
I do. I mean, we've had so many stressors in the world lately, right? Like just left and right. 2020 was like the year of the stressors. But the way that, people are phrasing that to you, I think is so interesting when people say like, well, I've had bad anxiety, because we don't have to always necessarily think of it as bad, but it does snowball. If we think to start with that anxiety must be bad, then we get anxious about having the anxiety. And, that actually makes us more anxious. And it can even prevent us from actually just dealing with whatever the source is of the anxiety. And the good news is even that the anxiety can actually become a real plus. Mother Nature gives us a little boost of adrenaline, and our focus, even visually, actually gets better when we have a certain amount of anxiety. And that boost is because it's there to help us to deal with stressors. But if we don't know how to channel it and we ruminate, we get stuck.
Well, but do you feel like in general, and I'm not just talking about, 2020, but maybe in like the past 10 years, I feel like, and maybe I was just lucky that all of the people in my youth were so calm and didn't have anxiety, but I don't feel like I really like this is people and anxiety. Like we talk about this now and it's part of the norm, right? People are using this term all the time. Do you feel like 10 years ago that was the case? I kind of
No.
don't,
Yeah,
right? So
that's a question, Amber. I swear, like you should have an honorary psychology degree because that actually is like a hot question right now, even amongst psychologists. Nobody really knows if it's actually true that we're seeing more anxiety diagnoses because, people are actually more anxious, or if it's because people are actually just getting more comfortable coming out of the closet and talking about something. So it's hard to say. But one of the big things that psychologists do talk about as far as what could be driving that spike over the last 10 years is, with the advent actually of all this social media and social comparisons and worrying that you're not as good as the people that you see on social media, even though, of course, you're seeing their highlight reel of their life, not their real life. It can be anxiety provoking for some people.
I want to just say right now for everybody, like I don't know about you, Dr. Chloe, but for me, I deal with this still in my day to day. As social media comes up right now, I'm trying to tackle TikTok and all of the wonders that make that up. And as somebody who didn't grow up with social media, as such a big part of my life, it can be um it can be stressing, I guess. It can be exhausting. I wonder, too, sometimes if people use the term anxiety incorrectly. Can you go ahead because, sort of coming off this idea that we're starting now to hear about anxiety more and more and people are talking about it. Sometimes I wonder it's like, is it really anxiety or is this just terminology that we've become like, oh my God, I'm so depressed. It's like, well, wait a minute. Are you really depressed? Or is this just sort of like the cultural vernacular that we're using these days?
Mhm.
So how do you define anxiety?
Mhm. Well, anxiety is actually something that we're all supposed to have, right? So, anxiety is actually a little bit of a concern about the future, about something that hasn't happened yet, but you're thinking about it. So, the healthy function of anxiety, the gift of anxiety, is that it does stimulate us to take preparation behaviors. So, for example, if I had a big event tomorrow and I had no idea what I was going to wear, and I was feeling super anxious to like, am I going to look frumpy? Am I going to like not have any clean clothes to wear? Like, what am I going to do? That little boost of anxiety that that healthy little fire that it puts under me and makes me uncomfortable with my current situation is actually what stimulates me to start doing preparation behaviors like calling a stylist or going shopping or shopping my own closet or just doing laundry, whatever it is that I need to do. So, again, like that little like healthy dose of anxiety is actually something that we want. But when people don't know how to deal with that, or they've somehow received the cultural message that we're never supposed to feel anxious, like that whole no fear thing, that people then feel like any feeling of fear is by definition bad, that's when people start second guessing themselves and getting confused.
So when can we officially say that like the anxiety is bad?
Well, I would say when you're going into the freeze. So that the reaction responses that we have to that, say, what am I going to wear tomorrow situation is fight, flight, or freeze, right? So fight would be to like engage in the situation, flight might be to like, feel like I have to cancel the event, which probably wouldn't be so healthy either. And then freeze would just be to sit there ruminating and maybe even just being negative about myself and saying, well, how could I let this happen? Everything
Right.
I wear looks bad. I never take care of myself. And then
The
just
snowball
turning the whole
effect.
thing into like a self punching bag situation instead of channeling it into doing something about it, which it would actually then become productive.
I love that you brought up this example of closets and something to wear because I do think, especially in the beauty space, and especially with social media and comparing ourselves, that there is this idea of perfectionism. And as somebody who kind of suffers from that myself. My husband always says I'm my own worst critic and I'm the hardest on myself. What do you think it is about perfectionism? Why are certain people sort of more inclined or obsessed with it?
Well, there is such a fine tipping point there because really, when we think about it, the ingredients for perfectionism at a certain level would actually, by definition, include self awareness. And so, self awareness is a really good thing. Being willing to take that first look in the mirror and acknowledge, like literally or figuratively, to look in the mirror and acknowledge, what are the things that I need to improve upon or work upon. And there are many people that actually could probably use a little bit more of a tendency to want to do that, to be willing and able to take ownership of the things that they do want to work on. So there are some healthy features, I think, of perfectionism when we think about it as just a striving to be our very best self and to have a lot of attention to detail, and to always be raising the bar on how we could improve. When we think about it in that light, there's really nothing so negative about it. But I think the tipping point comes when people say, if I'm ever able to locate anything about myself that could be improved, then I suck
Mm,
and I'm failing.
right.
And so, like for me, one of the most amazing things that actually really helped me a lot is, I read this book by someone. His name is Bobby Bones. He's a radio personality. He wrote a book about social media and he called it "If You're Reading This, I'm Not Lonely." And it was all about like having relationships with people over social media. But one of the things he said is, I always look back at the stuff I did like a year ago, even a week ago, and I sometimes cringe because I'm like, oh, like, how could I have done that? Like, I was so unpolished. And he said, but the way I got over it is, he said, I suddenly realized that if I didn't have those moments of looking back and realizing what I could improve, then I wouldn't be growing. The fact that I'm
Right.
able to look at where I am now and say, oh, well, I wasn't quite as far along back then, that's actually a sign of growth. So to me, the thing is to be able to look at those quote flaws or areas of improvement with an honest eye, but also with a compassionate eye that also really recognizes all of the fabulous things about yourself.
I love this too. It's reminding me so much of our last podcast where we were talking about the psychology of plastic surgery and, this idea that plastic surgery, when used for the right reasons, can actually be a real sign of confidence, not a sign of low self esteem, but a sign that says, hey, I recognize this thing about myself that I would like to change and I'm going to take action on it
Mhm.
and feel empowered to do so. So, um, I really like that. Now, for those of us who are focusing on that negativity, right? So when we're looking at perfectionism and we see something in the mirror that we don't like, and we start to go the other way, how can we kind of flip the switch and get our brains to start to turn that around?
Mhm. Well, one really good thing I think is to, first of all, ask yourself, what can I do about it? Right.
Hmm.
So if I'm looking in the mirror and I'm thinking, like, oh, I really don't like the size of my pores, instead of just sitting there, like repeating that over and over and just focusing on it, to just say to myself, well, what could I do about it? And then to kind of really challenge yourself if you are worried that maybe you're getting into like a obsessive space, to then ask yourself, is there anything else I could do with that half hour that it might take to do that, that would actually make me feel better today? And, if the answer is like, no, actually, I just really want to deal with these pores, like, then you know your answer. But it's always kind of asking yourself, is there anything else that I might rather do that might make me feel better? And that way you're actually not trying to argue yourself out of what may be a factual observation, that maybe your pores are like, looking like a certain way that day. And that may be true. You don't want to try to deny the truth by just, like, that's the thing too. A lot of research has shown that this like whole positive affirmations thing, where you just force yourself to look in the mirror and in that example say, my pores are perfect, they're exactly the way they should be. If there's a part of you that knows, like, actually that's not really how I want them, then it doesn't really come across as authentic with yourself. So you want to be authentic, but you also want to be compassionate.
Okay. I was not really raised with this concept of positive affirmations. Like I ground myself in gratitude where it's things that I'm thankful for. I think that helps you not. But wait, what is this whole positive affirmations? Like you just look in the mirror and you say, I am good, I am beautiful, I am happy.
Yeah. So positive affirmations are sometimes like aspirational statements, right? So, like,
This
for
is really
example,
work.
well, that's there's a lot of research and a lot of debate about that, but the research generally shows that they work if they are accurate, right? So
Mhm.
suppose I was having this, like, problem with like the pores or a big pimple. If I were able to have a positive affirmation like, I'm a beautiful person even if I have a pimple, right? Like, that would be a positive affirmation that actually really worked. But just looking in the mirror and chanting, my skin is perfectly clear when I know it's not, like, that
Ah.
actually becomes almost counterproductive.
And so like I get the being honest and accurate about it. So I'm a beautiful person. I have, even though I have this pimple, what is the science there? Like, is that supposed to sort of help elevate ourselves because we're kind of turning a negative thing into a positive thing?
Well, what it is that it has to be, again, accurate. So the problem is that you might actually be slipping into inaccuracy if you get so upset about the pimple that you say, I have this pimple, I'm ugly as sin, right? And so that's actually not accurate. So we want to steer you into a place of being accurate where you can notice and discuss the flaws, so to speak, again. And this is kind of, delving into that perfectionism territory, that you're able to recognize, that you're not like a superhuman person, that you have, these issues and these pimples, but that you're able to keep them in perspective. That's really the healthy spot.
So, is there anything else, aside from this sort of positive self talk that we can do for people who might be, when we're really obsessed about something? I know a lot of my girlfriends, we grew up obsessed about our weight. That has been something. I mean, I said the other day to my husband, like, what must it be like to be you who has never spent a day in his life feeling like, oh my God, I'm so fat? For me, there have been times when I was like, I don't want to go to that event because exactly what you're saying. back in the day, I went down this spiral of, "I don't wanna go here. I feel so fat," and that to me is, like, crippling. Um, how do we ho how do you get out of that?
Well, that's again the thing about perfectionism with high functioning people, which Amber, you totally are. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners absolutely are as well. And one of the things that high functioning people sometimes do is will deliberately over respond to any problem because that helps us to, know that we're not going to become lazy and, flat footed about problems by knowing, like, if I even, gain 5 pounds, I go ballistic and, tell myself, that I'm, turning into, totally fat and over responding and overdoing it to kind of prod myself into doing something about the issue. And as you said, a lot of us started with that habit in our teens. Now, I don't want to get too technical on you, but the executive lobe of the brain is not yet fully formed at that time. And so sometimes we actually need a stronger, fist to motivate ourselves and keep ourselves on track when we don't have the executive lobe, like naturally doing that for us. The problem comes in if we're still using those old habits even later in life. So, you, Amber, if you are telling yourself, like, oh, I'm so fat, again, babe, you're out of the realm of accuracy,
Right.
right? You're not accurate. So, the point is to be compassionate, to be able to say, I'm having a little bit of a bloated day. I'm not feeling like my most super svelte self, but I actually still look pretty good. And in fact, the curves are kind of a little bit hot.
It's I love that you just said that, right? We're gonna turn this around to something, that's positive, but I think everybody's had those days where you're just like, it just feels like nothing can go right. And I think that those are the days where I guess, yeah, having a little bit of a positive messaging, a little bit of self talk could really, really, really help us there. Do you feel like that there's really any, for the people out there who consider themselves perfectionists, other than the fact that it's like you're going to get something done, are there any other benefits to being that way?
Sure. I mean, on a certain level, it takes a rather high self esteem, right? To actually consider yourself to be a perfectionist, right? Like there's, kind of a certain vote of confidence in yourself if you are saying that about yourself. And I would just, jumping back to the thought about positivity, I want people to know that it's not always just about, just being positive. It's also about being authentic. That's where we really find the sweet spot. So, again, if we're feeling like we're noticing a flaw and we're, just aware of it, we don't have to try to just psych ourselves into thinking it's a positive. So we can be honest with ourselves about it, but we also want to be able to keep it in perspective. So you might even challenge yourself, like, for every flaw I notice, I'm going to force myself to name 5 things I do like about myself. And it's not to say that the quote flaw doesn't exist. I have open eyes, but I also keep perspective about the fact that overall I'm pretty good.
I like this. I was going to actually ask you, is there sort of some formula or formula is the wrong word, but some sort of recommendation that you have if we want to engage in this sort of positive self-talk? Is it like for every one, you just said for every one flaw, find 5 things that you like. Are there other sorts of guidelines for starting this sort of a practice?
Yeah, so that would be one. And then also noticing if there are certain environments, that tend to put you into that really negative space. Like if you have a friend that's like a frenemy and they're really competitive with you and you've, engaged in that. Because again, a lot of high functioning people are actually rather competitive. So if you do notice yourself, getting into that space a little bit, then to just step back and try to not maybe engage in situations that make you feel so competitive with yourself. But another, kind of thought about it is to flip the script on it a little bit. So when you do notice yourself, kind of picking at yourself a little bit, you might even try to imagine if you were talking to a good friend about the issue, like a good friend who is able to take real talk, like a good friend that doesn't want you to just be like, no, you're so gorgeous, someone who's able to be like, yep, it's true. Like, there is like a little issue with the such and such, but you could do X, Y, and Z about it if you wanted to. So the idea is you're getting out of a helpless space the idea is that we want to feel proactive and we want to feel empowered. And then when we do think of, what the options are that we have, then we ask ourselves, is that how I want to spend my time and energy? And if the answer is yes, that's okay. Then go ahead and do it. But the idea is just to know again that you have options. It's
Right.
also fun sometimes if you know that you get into like the doldrums occasionally. One thing that can be helpful is to actually set up like a rock star playlist of like, 5 or 6 songs that you just always listen to and always make you feel really hot and really good about yourself, and play them. And if you're really struggling, force yourself to sing along with them. I know that might sound weird, but I'll tell you why. Because that negative self talk machine in your brain of self criticism actually cannot keep up its monologue if you're already harnessing and attaching on to another monologue. So if you're singing a song, that's actually hijacking the language department of your brain, and it's stopping that negative part.
I love that. It's like you cannot do those 2 things at once, like, physically. Wow, that's a really great tip. Also, I would highly recommend Lizzo. Like, she's my go-to when I'm having a bad day. Love you, Lizzo.
Yes.
Yeah. Uh, the last thing I wanna ask you about, because I've heard a lot about this, and I said, so this is like one of those things. I wonder if it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, a cultural self-fulfilling prophecy. I've heard so much about doom scrolling. Like, I hear this all the time. Have you heard about this doom scrolling? And people are like, "Oh, I'm going on at night and doom scrolling." I'm assuming that. Uh, do you know what that is?
I feel like I've heard of it, but I'm not exactly sure what it is.
But it's like, so I've heard about it like from a lot of people. So these are the kinds of things sometimes I wonder if, like, culturally we get these ideas, or we hear something and we're like, "Oh yeah," but a lot of people have been saying that they doom scroll at night.
Is that just like reading a bunch of like negative comments and stuff?
I don't know, but I'm like, "Why are you doing this?"
Yeah.
Like, just
Well,
stop it. Okay, good. I wasn't sure if there was,
yeah.
like, some sort of psychology, behind why people are doing this and why everybody's kind of jumping on the bandwagon. It's also, like, sometimes it feels like if there's something out there that's negative, we all, not all, but a lot of people will tend to jump on that bandwagon to be, like, part of something, but I'm like, "Why would you wanna be part of something negative?"
Well, there is actually something in psychology called defensive pessimism. And it's actually a healthy thing to have to a certain degree. A lot of, high functioning people have it. It's where we kind of imagine the worst case scenario, and it defends against us being disappointed, right? So if I say like, "Oh, I'm going to go to that party and I'll probably not talk to anybody and it will be a terrible time." And I set super low expectations. And then that way I'll, feel thrilled if I have a good time. And it works to a certain degree. It's, fine to do in small doses. But those of us who are intelligent can actually get too good at our own mental tricks. And so then we turn that defensive pessimism machine like way, way up in our minds. And to me, that might kind of have a parallel with this doom scrolling thing of just focusing on all this negativity so that we feel like, we won't be disappointed, we won't miss anything, but then we get too good at it.
Well, you know what? I'm going to sort of end this on my own little note. In terms of perfectionism, just set the bar really, really low. I used to work in this one office and it was kind of like I would wear my gym clothes every day. And so on the days when I actually would like throw on lipstick and do my hair, it was like, whoa. Uh, so if you
I'll
set the
share.
bar low, you can only go up from there.
There's one other thing, Amber, that I did that actually really helped me, and I'll, share this with you. I don't share it with a lot of people, but there's a website. It's called hypnosisdownloads.com, and they
Okay.
have a recording called "Feel Attractive Now," and this it's like a hypnosis that helps you to just feel attractive. And the man says things in the recording about like how you've certainly had days when you've looked in the mirror and felt gorgeous, and guess what? You have the same face now that you did at that time. And like it really helped me. I listened to it a lot, like maybe 5 years or 10 years ago. I haven't even listened to it anymore, but it really helped me back then.
That's amazing. Thank you. What a great tip. So many great tips. And, we know that your book is coming out now. Can you tell people where they can get it?
Yeah, sure. Nervousenergybook.com. And it's also available on Amazon and everywhere else. And it's basically just a bunch of my favorite little mental hacks that help us take that anxiety and recognize it as a source of nervous energy that actually gives us a lot of power if we just know how to channel it.
Wonderful. I love that idea that we can transform the bad, if you will, the nervous energy into something positive. Dr. Chloe, it's always wonderful to have you on. If people want to know more about you, I know you do some great podcasts, your website, you've got blogs. Where can they go?
Nervousenergybook.com has everything they need.
Okay. And your personal website?
Sure. Dr. Chloe, drchloe.com.
Awesome. And of course, if you have any questions you want me to pass on to Dr. Chloe, I'm always happy to do that. You can email me at hello@artbeautypodcast.com. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at artbeautypodcast, and we will always see you next Tuesday. Bye.